this morning we're joined by Professor Lord Mensah, who is at the University of Ghana Business School Associate Professor of Economics, and Seth Chumakwabwa, CEO of the Association of Ghana Industries. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. And good morning
Great.
to our listeners.
So let me start off with you, Professor Lord Mensah, and the conversation today is, has the Ghanaian economy improved? You've listened to the finance minister presenting the figures from the first half of the year. Do you see an improvement in the economy from the figures presented by the finance minister?
Right. If you look at the numbers, right, looking at inflation moving from 54 to 23 thereabout. And then if you look at exchange rate, moving up as, we can see on the market around 15.35 thereabout, almost 15.5 to the dollar. I would say that this, numbers, only represent numerical decline and then also increase. In a sense that if you talk about the inflation, clearly the momentum that prices gathered on the market when it hit 54 is still lingering on. And me and you, we can testify to that as we're talking on the market. Prices, are not that stable as the numbers portray. And so clearly, on that aspect, I would say yes. We're still having some, momentum as far as price increase is concerned. And then another thing that was missing in the budget, and I don't know whether it was a tactical omission or not, is the level of exchange rate the government is going to work with. The finance minister talked about speculation, fueling, a depreciation of the cedi. And I was expecting him to give some certainty, right, around the projection of the exchange rate. We know very well by 30th July, they will... can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Right. We know by 30th July, they will end, they will sign an agreement with these Eurobond creditors that we have in negotiations with. And that will resume our debt payment. And if you look at the cash flow commitment on this Eurobond, this year alone, the year through, to the end of the year, we should pay around $400 and over million on our debt service. And I was expecting the finance minister to give us, some information on whether we have enough buffer to meet this, possible obligations that will come, going forward. But then we didn't see that. And then also, the entire budget never talked about, the exchange rate depreciation and then the levels. Because if you look at, what was stated in the budget, they were talking about percentages in decline, decline. And clearly, this does not give room for certainty. And so when he finished reading the budget, I said this man has left room for more speculation. Because, he's allowed more uncertainty to cloud out, the market as far as, the exchange rate numbers are concerned. And you're going to leave the market to speculate more at what levels they're supposed to sell the dollar. And that was, one of the shortfalls that I think, when it comes to the economy, the finance minister did not really, hit on as to my expectation. And then also, when you look at improvement in the banking sector's total assets, Ghana is a banking, sector-dominated financial, system. And so when you have a bank for which its assets has improved, but based on the short-term investment they've been doing with government, then I would say that it's an improved economy. Because banks are supposed to lend to the public. They're supposed to lend to the private sector, not to just rely on government investment to grow their assets. And the government, in the budget, the minister also testified that these bank assets are growing as a result of the short-term end of the, government markets. And across all the budgets, you didn't see anywhere that government, talks about long-term financing, how they're going to reorient the economy to ensure that they move, the pressure from short-term financing, which is treasury bills, dominated market, to the bond market. We've had bond restructuring. So far, the budget was completely silent on what is happening on that market. Then I asked myself, so what is being used to finance all the infrastructure that he mentioned, talking about Agenda 111, talking about...
Yeah, but Professor Lord Mensah, you have made a reference to short-term facilities. You've talked about how today the treasury bill market is what government is using, and it's the reason why banks are, able to grow their assets. Is that not obvious that that's what government is using to finance these things when it comes to the borrowings as well as the, revenue that the government has earmarked for the year?
Yeah, because if you look at the inflows that you're expecting, the revenue mobilization sources of the government, we're talking about taxes being, dominated. If you look at the percentage increase, and you can spread the other sources, as it's supposed to be. It's clearly stated in the main budget that was read, and clearly, you ask yourself, a government that its financing sources is limited, and the taxes. The reason why he could not remove, the taxes as being requested by the businesses was that we have mortgaged the taxes for the IMF program, the inflows of the IMF program. And we promised IMF that we're going to increase our tax to GDP from 14% to, 18%. And, within these taxes that we have, all the various levies, the e-levy, the COVID, and all those that, businesses are saying it should be removed. And in fact, not businesses alone, individuals like myself sitting here, I feel the pinch of, increase in prices as a result of some of these taxes. And so, from where I sit, I think, if you have an economy, right, I'm not saying government is using the treasury bills to finance, those infrastructure. But if you have an economy where, all the possible investment horizons are limited to short term, it's a sign of depression, because every bank that raises money will tend to invest with a government instrument, rather than turning to individuals and businesses. And this has been happening for so many, years now. We're looking at for the past, 3 to 4
years. But Prof Mensah, do we have a choice? We're shut out of the international capital market. I'm sure if I were to ask you whether you're comfortable, putting money in government of Ghana bonds in this country, your response will be no. So where are the options?
Winston, if we don't have a choice, then probably we may have to look at the other side, which is cutting down expenditure, so that it will not fuel out, that exorbitant, demand for what we call it funds. And therefore, government keeps on pressuring that treasury bill market. That is what we need to know.
Prof, how do you assess the finance minister's plans to cut expenditure? He did mention a few things. For instance, he says that in the coming months, they are going to do a stock-taking exercise and prioritize certain projects. So it's not everything that was budgeted for that they are actually going to spend money on. They are going to streamline the earmarked funds as part of ongoing expenditure rationalization measures. They talked about a blanket purchase agreement that has been initiated to fully capture multi-year commitments or contracts in the GIFMIS. And then also they said they will be implementing sanctions for those who don't comply with the public finance management law requirements, among others. How do you assess these and other cost-cutting measures announced by the finance minister?
Well, if you look at the various expenditure measures that the finance minister mentioned, again, they are all in the main budget that was reviewed yesterday. The budget that was read in November, you will see all those expenditure rationalization, expenditure prioritization measures. I was expecting the finance minister this time around to give us an update on how far they've gotten to as far as all these measures are concerned, and how much we have been able to save from these measures. We didn't see that. It was a rehash of what is being, what was done, what was put in the budget, main budget somewhere in November for 2024, being repeated that we are going to do it. I mean, for me, I think it's not enough to convince me that, look, this is what you have done, and then as a result of that, that is why you are calling for expenditure reduction.
Right. I want to bring in Seth Chumakwabwa, who's the CEO of the Association of Ghana Industries. Hello again, Mr. Chumakwabwa. We had a very long conversation yesterday while we were awaiting the start of the reading of the media review. So now we know what is in it. Let me ask you, were your expectations met?
Your call has been put on hold.
Right. It would appear that we've lost Mr. Seth Chumakwabwa there. We're going to try and reconnect to him so that we can pick up on his expectations. But back to Prof. Mr. Chumakwabwa, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Fantastic. So shall I go over the question one more time?
Yes, please.
Okay, so yesterday we waited for some time until the media review was read. Did it meet your expectations? Was it worth the wait?
Oh, worth the wait, yes. It was an important national event, and it is important that organizations like us, representing industry, representing so many stakeholders, it was important that we listen, and therefore it was worth the wait. In terms of expectations, I'll be honest to say that we didn't have too high expectations in terms of significant changes in the whole structure of our economy, because we know how challenging the economy has been over the past 2 years. So we were expecting a bit more of the indicators of stability. And in that sense, yes, there were points to that effect. Government making an attempt not to overblow its expenditure, even though it's an election year. That's against the normal tradition, because in Ghana it's been the trend, which is unfortunate. So this time there's clear indication that government is not going to spend that much. And if you look at the indicators, it's pointing to some stability in the macroeconomic environment, which is good. An aspect that we would have loved to have some changes with income. Again, it's not too surprising if you look at the very history of midterm budget review. In previous times, midterm budget review, there were no major supplementary budgets to make significant changes. But in recent times, it's becoming a bit of a trend. So following the recent trend, we were hoping that some of the issues we have concerns with, and we have over the period been communicating to government to review, could also be looked at. And that wasn't done. And that has to do with the taxes that people are confronted with, and there's a lot of complaints. So submitting about, I would say about 40 to 50% of our submissions on the midterm budget review was related to the taxes, and there was no tax review. So as far as that's concerned, yes, our situation wasn't met. But generally, on the macroeconomic stability, I think it's a good pointers to that effect.
Now, there were lots of whispers about the potential of at least the COVID levy being scrapped. There were suggestions the e-levy was being reconsidered. These things got the system excited, but there was no sign of any such policies or measures in the budget. How is industry taking that?
Honestly, the visitors came in at the very last, minutes or few days to the budget. All along, we knew that it was going to be difficult to make very significant changes. But we were hoping that considering the advocacy we've done, government will have a relook at the whole tax structure, because there have been a lot of complaints. The fact that some of these taxes are becoming really nuisance taxes, that is obstructing and not encouraging local production. So when we heard that it was going to be we were excited about it, and it didn't happen. But as I said previously, before the recent time, previously midterm budgets reviews, we are not looking at major changes. And we also looked at the fact that because we are under IMF conditionality, and there's a lot of push for government to raising a lot more revenue to balance this budget, it's becoming difficult to expect very significant changes in the situation. Unless you look at the development aspect, which is what you were looking at, that if you could have tax regime or system that would spur growth in the manufacturing sector, in the industry sector, you may suffer a bit of revenue now, but then in the long run, it will pay. Because the other risk is that when you have high levels of taxes and it's affecting the productive sector, you reduce their capacity to produce. And if they're unable to produce, they don't make that much profit for you to tax at the end, which is the corporate tax or other forms of taxes. And therefore, whilst you are taking, on one hand, you are taking the taxes from another, and on the other hand, you're also constraining yourself from getting the post-production taxes, which are, for me, more progressive. So I really would have loved to see some changes in the tax regime, but it didn't happen. So let's look into the December budget, and we'll continue our work in that respect, and expect that something is there, because we really need to look at our tax regime.
Right.
Okay. Now let me bring in Professor Lord Mensah, and talking about expenditure cuts. So, Prof, in the media review, the minister talks about how we've completed the debt restructuring program with official creditor committee, and we've which has resulted in some $2.8 billion of debt relief, which means we'll not service our debt to official creditors between 2023 to 2026. He talks about Eurobond holders covering $13.1 billion, which will lead to a cancellation of $4.7 billion and our debt and provide debt service relief of $4.4 billion between 2023 and 2026. However, if you look at the fact that in 2023 November, when we presented the budget, we actually estimated that we're going to be paying some 19 billion Ghana cedis for external debt interest payments. In 2024, with all of these, we only make provision of reducing expenditure by some 7 billion, which the minister says is as a result of revising our interest payments downwards, or the savings that we have made. The question is, where is the remainder? Couldn't that have also been savings, and as a result led to more expenditure cuts?
Right. Winston, when it comes to the expenditure side of the budget, I had so many questions. You know, at the time that we were reading the budget was read on the floor of Parliament. The expenditure, you can take the budget for 2024 and look at it. The expenditure was around 226, that is 226.68 billion, right? And then when I saw the document for the mid-year budget review, I mean, the minister was requesting for a revision of 237 billion, which is about, 237 billion, Ghana cedis. So I was asking myself, how do you read a budget of expenditure 226.68 billion and come and ask for reduction in expenditure of about 237? Then I jumped into the appropriation bill. You know, when a budget is read on the floor, what is passed into law by Parliament can be different from what is being read on the floor. So I went into the appropriation bill and I saw that the expenditure appropriation was around 259, right? So a difference of about 36 billion, relative to what was read on the, the floor of Parliament. So if we have such a situation, then it means that interest savings you are talking about were not realistic when, if you take into consideration what was passed into law, right? That is the monies that the minister can take from Controller Accountant General to spend in the economy, as far as interest payments, compensations, grants to other, state agencies, and all those are concerned, capital expenditure and all those. So these variations in expenditure, you cannot clearly come out whether indeed, if we have gotten a debt restructuring, there's going to be, that kind of savings you are talking about to build into, expenditure cuts far away from what we're seeing, we saw in yesterday's, budget review, Western.
Yes, but talking about that, you're right. If you look at even the 2024 budget, right after its presentation, the arrears and amortization always left, below the line, and so these are ones that come in later. So in the conversations, that one will be kept out of it. But the point is that if you have some 19 billion Ghana cedis as interest payments on external debt, which you talk about making savings, as a country that is concerned about expenditure cuts and rationalization of expenditure, wouldn't it be prudent to, and bearing in mind also that there's a need to make payments subsequent, wouldn't it be prudent to actually make savings by cutting down totally on the 19 billion instead of just 7 billion?
Okay, well, so listen, what we need to appreciate is that when you go into debt restructuring and you get debt relief, right, it does not mean that it's money sitting down. And as a result of that, you can easily, cut down expenditure and then use that money in replacement of this expenditure cut. That is not the case. The debt relief, and that was when the finance minister and the president made mention of saving 10 billion, cedis as a result of the debt restructuring. I question it because these are expected savings. That means your economy should be able to produce, to make that money for you to say that this was the money we were supposed to use to pay our debt, but then we're not, paying it, and therefore it is the money that can fill in, our expenditure. So the expenditure that we projected to be 237, possibly we are reducing it to 227, to make room for that kind of, money that we have generated. But this is not the case with this economy. This economy, as far as our production is concerned, we cannot, boast of that kind of, savings as far as, the current state, within the current state that we find ourselves in. And that is why possibly the finance minister did not look at, or did not even mention that we are getting savings, and as a result of that, we can cut down expenditure to fill in for that purpose.
Prof. Mensah, beyond the savings, if you have an expenditure item of which you don't remove, that still remains on your books and you can spend it. So the question is, if we had an expenditure item to pay this amount of interest to our external debtors, and today, because of the domestic debt exchange, these amounts will be paid post 2026. Why do you keep that expenditure item when you no longer will be making those payments, at least in this fiscal year?
Yeah, so we need to appreciate that as we speak now, the debt agreement we've had, they are just MOUs. Okay? That is not exactly, what will report on the agreement that will spell out exactly what you're supposed to be paying. So as we speak now, the finance minister does not know after the MOU what these, external creditors are likely to come up with when we especially the OCC, when we go to them individually to start negotiating with them, to get to the levels of payment we're supposed to do. That is one side. And then also, if you are supposed to pay, right, money in terms of interest, and as a result of debt restructuring, you did not, pay, it does not mean that it's money sitting down. That calls for reduction in expenditure. That is what we need to appreciate. And so it can still be in your books in anticipation of the expectation, what is likely to happen, in the future. And that is why possibly, the finance minister cannot be specific and say, this is how much we're going to save in terms of interest payments. So going forward, we have to keep this money by the side, and that will reduce our expenditure.
Yes, but Prof, so if you're keeping that for the future, then that should find itself in a sinking fund.
Well, it's not money sitting down. They are expected.
Yes, so
right.
Yes, so
your economy is not producing to have that money as we speak now. So if your debt restructuring has given you debt relief of 10 billion, do you have 10 billion sitting down in your buffers? You don't have it. You are yet to what? You are yet. You remember all these things we are going through is just to find a way to give us some economic relief, so we can, you build up the economy going forward. That is why when you go to debt relief, it is expected that your interest rate structures comes down, your inflation comes down. These are things that will entice investment into the economy. And as a result of that, you can make up those savings. They are not money sitting down for you to direct it into your sinking fund or any buffer.
Okay. Let's talk about speculation then.
Yes, and Prof, we've been talking about how speculation is really a function of logic. People look at what is expected to happen and they make decisions about what to do with currency as a result of that. Now, we've noticed how this affects the depreciation of our cedi. So, having heard the mid-year review, in your professional assessment, what would a speculator do? Will they hoard more dollars, or will they get rid of their dollars after hearing the finance minister yesterday?
Right. So I mentioned that earlier, that in the budget, that is from the main budget that was read in November, and then even in the review that we had yesterday, there is no specific, exchange rate that was mentioned in there that government is saying we are going to work with this exchange. The government also does foreign transactions. And by so doing, they may have to change, cedi to what? Dollars. So ask yourself, what exchange rate would the government be using? And like I said, because the budget did not, and the review did not mention any specific levels of exchange rate as projection, it leaves room for more speculation. And remember, speculation is part of economic dynamics. Speculation thrives when there is prolonged uncertainty. So once you give room for, more uncertainty around any economic indicator, you give room for, speculation on that economic indicator. And one of them is the exchange rate that we are seeing here. You could see that in the budget, there was silence on what we call it, the exchange rate. And with this silence on the exchange rate, it gives the market to speculate more. And as a result of that, from next week, you're going to see, the reaction on the market as far as the exchange rate is concerned. And especially when you've signed an MOU and you're about to go into an agreement, right? You should have given certain scenario, possibly to tell us that, you have enough buffer. These are likely, debts that we're supposed to pay in the second half of the year. As I mentioned, once by 30th July, we signed an agreement with Eurobond holders where the cash flow lines we may have to start coughing around 400 million for the second half of the semester. The second half of the year to satisfy the Eurobond, obligations that are due. So effectively, if you are able to assure the market that we are expecting these inflows, we are expecting that inflows, and as a result of that, we should be able to satisfy these obligations without shaking up our current accounts. You give the market assurance. It gives a good comfort, and then also possibly give a projection as far as government is concerned. But for now, they have left the market to determine the exchange rate level, and that is when
So, in your opinion, are we going to see a further depreciation of the cedi as a result of this?
Oh yes, we should expect that, because taking foreign inflows, as our way of getting dollars into our buffers. Of course, foreign inflows. In the review, the minister talks about remittances, and then also possibly getting tourists who comes into the country. That is the only measure that I saw that is likely to bring in foreign inflow. And then the IMF program that brought in 360 million recently. But then looking at the obligations ahead, right? And then also nobody knows what exactly is happening at the Bank of Ghana as far as the country's current accounts is concerned. You leave room for more speculation to follow up the depreciation of the cedi.
Right. I've got one for you, Mr. Chuma Kwabwa. The Deputy Finance Minister, Dr. Stephen Amoah, says that we should feel relieved that they didn't introduce any new taxes. Does industry feel relieved?
Well, not at all, because we're not expecting new taxes anyway. What we were expecting was actually a revision of the current taxes and a possible withdrawal or amendment of some of them. So if that didn't happen, then the worst couldn't have happened either, and that is introducing a new taxes. And because we complained a lot about the current tax regime, and therefore introducing taxes wouldn't have really helped the situation. I think that, as I mentioned yesterday in our discussion, what is very important is to strengthen local production and ensure that the tax structure is positioned in a way that supports industrial and manufacturing and agriculture, the productive sector, so that you can make the taxes at the end of the production process. In that case, it doesn't really affect the production process so much. So post-production taxes are always better than pre-production. And therefore, we were rather expecting to see some changes in the tax structure. If that didn't happen, let's see how it goes up to the end of the year. The next year's budget, let's see some improvement in that area. But to say that we should be relieved that there was no introduction of new taxes, I don't think it's relief, because we're not expecting in the first place. Then the question on the speculation, I think, as Prof said, it's very largely determined by the opportunities in the system. If we are business people, and when you are not sure of when the net exchange rate is going to be, the tendency is to try and buy foreign exchange in advance. And then the worst part of it is that it becomes a store of value of your currency. So people who do not even need the money then begin to speculate and buy, and thinking that when the cedi depreciates, they will change it and make more money. So those who do not even need it also come into the market, and that's where the speculation comes in. And that element is very, very strong in our current dispensation. It's affecting the cedi strongly. That is why anytime the cedi depreciates, at the very beginning, AGR, for example, we've taken a position not to be talking about it, because when you fuel it allows speculation to set in. It creates so much an alarming situation, and everybody starts craving for dollars and all that. That affects the economy.
Right.
So I think the certainty is good, and assurance by government that we have plans in terms of revenue mobilization, in terms of foreign exchange earnings, and we know that we will not need so much of the foreign exchange as against local cedi, and therefore everything will be stabilized is very important. That aspect is that normally speculation is not very reflected in the very long term. It's very short spread. So if Bank of Ghana steps in at the right time, anytime the shortage in the system, and Bank of Ghana steps in at the right time to inject some funds, you will see that it will curb the speculation. Then we'll be able to manage the situation. Because when the speculation sets in, those who don't need the funds also come in. And it creates further problems for the business who really need the money to import. Right. But in the long term, we just have to strengthen our local production. Let's grow local industry. If we do that, we will reduce the need for foreign exchange. And then speculation and all that will be taken out of the system. In the meantime, in the short time, of course, we cannot do too much changes within the structure. But in the long term, let's think of how.
Oh dear, I think we lost Mr. Chumakwabwa there, but we did get the thrust of his thoughts on speculation. So thank you very much, Mr. Seth Chumakwabwa, CEO of Association of Ghana Industries. We also heard from Professor Lord Mensah, economist at the University of Ghana Business School. Thank you to Prof as well.